Okay, recording is started, and welcome to the June the 20th Phenomenology Research Design. Dr. Karen Johnson will share her knowledge and experience, followed by Q&A at the end, and a brief description is example for phenomenological dissertations. They will be discussed and evaluated, and we also going to be using the latest and greatest DBL tool where everybody is learning about it. So, Dr. Johnson, is yours.
Thank you, Armando. Welcome, everyone, to our this month's webinar from the Research Methodology Group. Our topic this month is phenomenology, and a lot of the materials that I'm going to use tonight are materials that were created in our first phenomenology seminar or webinar last summer when Dr. Ryan Rominger and a recent graduate and I did a presentation that was mostly on the history and development of this philosophy and research design. And if you want to see that entire presentation again, because it will have more background than I'm going to cover tonight, on my title slide here, this first link is to that entire presentation on our YouTube site that UFP has on YouTube. So we're not going to go quite as far into depth in some of the history and development as we have in the past. And then the second link is a link to our DBL decision-based learning model that Armando mentioned. We're going to look at phenomenology tonight as a research design and think about how to evaluate proposals or dissertations or articles or research that we're thinking about doing to see if, in fact, all of the components actually align to this research design. I am Dr. Karen Johnson. I've been teaching for College of Doctoral Studies since 2005. Of course, then it was School of Advanced Studies. I have about 35 to 40 graduates who have completed their dissertations, and many of them are still working with us in various research areas and using their degrees as practitioners, representing us all very well, and about an equal number of students committees who I've served on who have also graduated. And that's not really bragging. It's just I'm proud of our students, and one of the things that I always say is, as I talk about all these students who completed successfully, I sometimes wake up and look at the list of questions that students have in the email or in the classroom, and it looks almost like a foreign language. So I don't know that we ever really become experts. We just all continue to be students of research designs, and I'm certainly just a student of phenomenology. But I want to share with you what I've learned in recent years and see if there's some way that we can use it in our own research or with our students. So tonight I want to cover a few things. We'll talk just briefly about the context of phenomenology and who some of the thought leaders were. Phenomenology is a broad topic. It's both a philosophy and a research design, and we'll look at it from a couple of just arbitrary clusters or groups of types of phenomenology that Ryan and I and others have agreed on in the past. These are not the only ways to group this type of research designs together. It's just what works for us based on what we're reading and studying and learning about the field. So we've kind of lumped together in a cluster transcendental, classical, descriptive, based on Husserl's writings, and Hermeneutical and interpretive or IPA based on Heidegger's writings and thoughts and ideas and research. And then we're going to look at the problem, purpose, question statements, and research questions and interview questions and evaluate those using the DBL model. If you're not familiar with decision-based learning, this is a software created by a group of researchers at BYU and Dr. Kenneth Plummer. I'm not sure if he's online with us tonight or not. He was going to try to be. He's one of the key players there and has been introducing several of us to this model as a way to evaluate proposals and studies as they relate to research design. We'll also talk about some differences between the phenomenological research method, which I'll probably refer to as PRM most of the time, and other research designs, and then open for questions and answers, and I'll look at a long list of references that might be helpful to faculty and students alike. So, as I said, phenomenology is both a philosophy and a research design. And thoughts that I'm sharing tonight and that we've shared in our previous webinar, I like to refer to that as Phenomenology 1.0, and maybe this is Phenomenology 2.0. And together, I hope they'll be useful for you. Our information is embedded in the language of thought leaders Husserl and Heidegger. And I think maybe I should stop and throw in a little caveat, if I can. Those of us who are working in the College of Doctoral Studies are aware of the recent CDS dissertation guide and the language that it uses to talk about phenomenology. And it says because it has its roots in philosophy and psychology that it may not typically be the best approach for our best research design for our students in our practitioner degree programs. So, like students who are getting the DM or the EDD, ET, or, some of the, well, really all of our degree programs now are practitioner degrees. So there's some exceptions mentioned in that guide that talks about maybe in healthcare or nursing, there might be some instances where it might be appropriate for a student to use it and be able to align it to their degree program. But we need to remember that doesn't preclude it as, a very viable research design for us as faculty and graduates and soon-to-be graduates as we're doing other research and preparing for presentations and articles to publish. So I don't think that we shouldn't take that to mean it doesn't fit in what we're doing. It just doesn't necessarily fit easily into the practitioner degree program. So one of the things I think that helps students wants to use this design, if it truly matches their problem they want to study, then they need to be really careful that it's done in a really clear, concise manner that reviewers won't question, why are you doing this in a practitioner's degree or program? So that little caveat is out there, just we want to recognize that. And many of the resources that we've used to draw comments from are included in the presentation tonight. Kind of throw them out here and there as they relate to the comments, but all of the references are located again at the end of the slides. So when you get the slides later on, you'll have everything. You won't need to take notes as we go along now. But one of the articles, I think Ryan actually found this, it's a Davidson article. It's an excellent article about, it's in qualitative research in psychology and called Phenomenological Approaches in Psychology and Health Sciences. And it just is a really good overview of how to use this research design. And then, of course, all of George's work, whatever you're reading, is probably going to relate to using a PRM. Some other books that we've been reading and studying and talking about, these are the names that you're going to see and hear when you're using this research method. Works, of course, Smith along with Flowers and Larkin, particularly with IPA, Moustakis, Weigel, and of course Van Manen. And again, all of these are also in the reference list. But for those of us who are visual people, I like to actually see the books and see what it is that we're sharing and reading and thinking about.
Karen, let me interrupt you for just 1 second.
Okay.
We are seeing the DBL, and that is exactly what you want us to see right now, right?
No, you should be seeing the slides. You are not?
No.
Okay, let me see if I can figure out why. Now are you seeing the slides?
No, we're not. You may have to unshare the DBL and either share the whole desktop or unshare this application and share the PowerPoint.
Let me see if I can do that. Do you see the slide now?
No, just unshare what you're sharing. Go to the bottom top right hand side where you see the share screen and you click it. Should be an option to stop. There you go. Okay, and now you can share, and then you have to either I think it would be better if you share your whole desktop so you don't have to be switching back and forth between applications. If you can do that, otherwise you're gonna have to be doing this back and forth, right? So share again, but this time try to share the whole desktop. If you cannot, then only share the PowerPoint application. And when you're ready for DBL, you have to go back to DBL and do the same thing. I will let you know as soon as I see it.
Now, do you see the
There you
slide?
go. I got it. That's it. I can see.
All right, I apologize. So here are the books I was talking about. I didn't realize you couldn't see them. So again, it's Wirtz, Smith, Mistakis, Vagel, and Van Manen. So as we were talking about the roots of phenomenology, it does have German philosophical roots, and two of the early um, thought leaders on this topic were Husserl and Heidegger. And there's Husserl looked a lot at consciousness, the intentionality of consciousness in the world, the difference of the actual thing in the world and our understanding of that thing. And he said we can only experience our conscious experience of a thing, and questions, can we really get to the core essence of what that thing is? So this is kind of the beginning of thinking about how do we relate our experiences, our lived experiences. Heidegger followed Husserl. He agreed with some of the things that he wrote about, but challenged some others as well. He says there's a layer of interpretation of anything that we want to study, and we can't really get at the core essence of anything due to our own lenses, the culture, our language, or the thrownness. And by thrownness, he's talking about how people are, where and how we're thrown into the world. What is our culture? What's our language? What's our environment? And then this was followed by George's work. He brought phenomenology research into the West, where it was called pure descriptive or transcendental phenomenology, among other things. And again, as I said earlier, there's many different ideas and thoughts about the different types of phenomenology as a research design. And so it's important, I think, to read the various initial thought leaders to get a clearer picture of how we got to using this as a research design. There is this interpretive process where we look at our understanding of things through interpretation rather than direct knowing, and all of our interpretation involves looking through lenses, and this leads to a lot of the debate that we see now on whether or not we can truly do bracketing. Bracketing is thought of as where we have to bracket what we're trying to study away from our own bias and not see everything through our lens. And there's a big debate in the literature about whether that's possible or not possible. So if you're interested in that sort of kind of academic information, there's certainly lots of great things out there to read, and here are some of those primary people to look for. In transcendental phenomenology, allows the researcher to reflect on what the participants said, and I'm going to mention reflection and being reflective a lot in our comments tonight because that's so important in this research design. We use a lot of intuition and imagination to help form pictures of the phenomenon as we listen to the participants talk about their experiences. But it's really important to always keep in mind that we see the experiences through the participants' eyes to understand what it was like for the participants. So we want to look for the wholeness of their experience rather than the smaller parts, but we have to begin with those smaller parts by getting all that deep, rich data from the participants. So what are some topics or problems that might be appropriate to study with phenomenology? Certainly in the hermeneutical area, there's this intention to capture the essence of each participant's personal experience. Phenomenology, kind of in its purest sense, isn't typically about others' experiences. I've seen students particularly want to do research where they want to learn about the experiences of homeless students, but they're not interested or willing to spend the time going through the process to be able to do studies involving children. So they want to try to interview teachers or counselors about the students' homelessness experiences. And that's not, in my opinion, and in others as well, that's not really truly phenomenology. It's not the lived experience of the person that you're gathering the data from. So what are some examples that would be appropriate? So here's one, a nurse's experience of helping an elderly person who is dying. And it's clearly about the nurse's lived experience in that situation. It's not about the person the elderly person is dying. It's not about how to care for that person, although those would certainly be viable studies. They just wouldn't necessarily be phenomenological studies. Similarly, a teacher's experience of discrimination within public schools. That's not a study about whether or not discrimination exists within public schools. It's not a study about is more prevalent in one type of community or another. It's not that sort of thing. It is whatever teachers you're talking to, it's their lived experience of the discrimination. And then another thing that might fit in some of our programs would be like a leader's experience of deciding what type of leader to be in an organization. And that would focus on like somebody who's temporarily or suddenly thrust into a leadership role. What is their experience? What is their decision-making experience as they deal with that? But in all of these instances, the focus is on a person and that person's experience, not on whatever else is going on. And this is just, again, some of those introductory references that we've mentioned before. And another reminder that we need to look at the original text and get a good understanding of the topic as we're moving along. So with that really fast, high-level overview of some thoughts about philosophy, I want to go back to the decision-based learning module. And
I can tell you when I see it, okay?
Yeah, this is awkward. Okay, decision-based learning. So now can you see the model again?
I can see it now. Go ahead, please.
Okay. So in the decision-based learning model, one of the things that we can do is take a proposal or a plan for a study that we want to do, or for faculty that a student is proposing to us, and we can use just in time, just enough information in the software that helps us go through the steps to evaluate each of the main components in each of the main components in the proposal. So how does that work? So click on continue, and I think that any time that we're evaluating a study or a planned study, that one of the key things to decide about is whether or not the purpose of that study is aligned with the research design. So I have some information here. The first question we would ask in this evaluation is the purpose of the study aligned with the PRM research design? And then we ask, how do I decide? In my perfect world, that was supposed to take us to, can you see the purpose statement slide now, Armando? Armando, do you see the evaluating the purpose statement slide?
I can see it.
Okay, all right. So our question that we ask here at this decision point is, did the researchers seek to understand the lived experience of the participants? That's the criteria that we want to use for this research design. If the purpose statement includes the words lived experiences or other words that denote how human beings have experienced a certain phenomenon, then the answer in the decision model is yes. If there is no language that states or denotes lived experiences in the purpose statement, then it likely is not, or it needs some serious tweaking to make sure that that's included. So what are some examples of purpose statements that might be appropriate in an HPRM study? Since the purpose of this type of research is typically to fill a gap in the research literature and to address a problem that the students identified, some clear, direct language should be used, and here are some examples. The purpose of this HP study is to understand how a nurse who is working with an elderly patient who is dying deals with his or her emotions while focusing on necessary tasks. So this relates back to that topic I mentioned earlier. So there's this problem of not knowing how nurses deal with this situation. So we don't have the words lived experiences necessarily in any of these statements, but you can see the words here that mean that. So we want to understand how a nurse who's working with an elderly patient who is dying deals with his or her emotions. So it's not we're not studying the tasks they perform, we're not studying the patient, we're not studying anything in the healthcare situation. We're just interested in the actual experiences of the nurse as he or she goes through this experience. For the second topic that we looked at a while ago, a possible purpose statement might be, the purpose is to gather descriptions of instances of discrimination toward teachers within public schools in order to further understand the influence they have on the teachers who experience them. So you see the words there, we are getting to what are the lived experiences of these teachers who are experiencing discrimination within public schools. And then the third example ties to the third topic we had a while ago. The purpose of this HP study is to gather a rich description of the decision-making moment of leaders who assume temporary leadership roles in order to better understand the decision-making and meaning-making process of the leader making the decision. So it's all about how the leader makes meaning out of the experience and how can we understand that lived experience. Some TPRM purpose statements. And by the way, these were shared last year by Ryan and Diana. The purpose of this transcendental study is to develop a deeper understanding of the emotions associated with the personal commitment of rural volunteer firefighters. The purpose of this study is to understand the daily lived experiences of young leaders ages 20 to 40 who supervise mature employees ages 50 to 70. I think she took these actually out of dissertations that we found online. So these are studies that you might be able to locate if you're interested in them. Or this final one, the purpose is to explore the lived experiences of employees who were victims of cyberbullying in the workplace. And again, it's not about cyberbullying, it's not about what should be going on in the workplace. It's only about the lived experience of the people who were cyberbullied in the workplace. I must have liked these references, Armando, because I put them everywhere. We'll bypass those this time. So back to the decision-based learning model. Let me see if I can share that again. We'll have to work this out before the next webinar, so we're not doing this each time. So if the answer to
I see it now.
Pardon me?
I see it now.
Okay, thank you. So if the answer to is the purpose of the study aligned with the PRM design is no, then this is a time when we might consider other qualitative research designs, such as narrative inquiry, which is probably the closest research design to phenomenology, or case study, or grounded theory, or another method that truly fits with the purpose. But if the answer is yes, then we simply move to our next decision point. What is the next decision that we have to make? So the next decision might be, are the research questions aligned with the PRM research design? And of course, one way to test that is the research questions, of course, also have to be aligned with a purpose statement. And I like to tell my students that the easiest way to assure that you have alignment between the purpose statement and the research question is to make sure that the research question is simply a restatement of the purpose, but written as a question. So how do we decide if we've done that correctly? And I'm guessing that you don't see my slides yet, right? Can you see the research questions, Armando?
Not yet. Unfortunately, it looks like it's sharing application-wise, so you have to be switching between applications as opposed to the desktop. So
I did switch. Can you see the slides yet?
no, not yet. It's still it's coming now.
Oh, you got it?
Not yet, but it's coming. The DBL disappeared. And our apologies to the audience, but everybody is learning this. But trust me, we're gonna become the experts. But we're getting there.
Right. So can you see the research question?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the alignment of the research questions back to the purpose statements that we just discussed. So we talked about having the purpose. Oh, this is not the right one. The purpose, we talked about the purpose statement being to understand the experience of nurses caring for a dying elderly patient while managing one's own emotions instead of completing the necessary task. So the research question is just simply asking, what is that lived experience? So it truly is as simple as taking the purpose statement and rewriting it as a question. Same thing for the second one, what's it like for school teachers to experience discrimination from administrators within public schools? So again, that's just taking the purpose statement and making an interrogative statement, a question, and using that as the major research question, the primary research question. And in the third example that we had, what's a decision and meaning-making process like for leaders who assume a temporary leadership role in an organization? Or another way to ask the same thing is, what's a lived experience of deciding what type of leader to be when a leader assumes a temporary leadership role in an organization? So again, it's simply rewriting the purpose statement as the research question. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that and go back to the decision-based model. So if we've determined that the research questions have aligned with the purpose statement and with which then would make them aligned with the design, then we simply choose yes and go to the next question that we want to ask. And in this instance, does the sample selection reflect the appropriate size for a phenomenology study? And again, the choices are yes and no, but this is maybe not quite as black and white as some of the other pieces in alignment. So let's go look at some things that we might consider as we think about the sample size. So do you see the sample size slide, Armando?
It.
So in evaluating the sample size, we're simply asking, is the sample size appropriate for a PRM study? And this is where some of the discussion comes in, some of the debate. My preference when I'm working with this type of study is to have a very small sample size, maybe 3 participants. The ideal range could be as few as 1 or 5, 2, 3, 4. All those are good sample sizes because we're going to do a lot of iterative interviewing. We're going to talk to the same people over and over. So we're going to have plenty of data, but it's going to be from a small number of people. And if the sample size is too large, if it gets to be greater than 8, then it's really hard to allow for in-depth interviewing and analysis in any kind of repetitive kind of way.
We don't see it yet, Karen.
Oh, you don't see it?
Nope.
Try something else. Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay, so some of the debate is about the sample size. I see a lot of dissertations and some published journal articles where the sample size is much larger, but it's difficult to really get the deep, rich data when you're interviewing a lot of different people. So if you're just going from one person to the next, and gathering, just your initial questions and not going back and doing a lot of probing, then you're likely not going to get the true lived experiences that you want in a PRN. In some qualitative designs, one of the goals of the data collection is saturation. But in PRM, the focus is more on getting deep, rich data from a small group of participants by interviewing each person 2 or more times. Participants describe their own experiences and increase their own awareness of their feelings about the lived experience. So, again, this is one of those things where you talk about it to another researcher, or you talk about it with a student, and that they can always find other examples where a much larger number is used and there's attempt to reach saturation. But in my mind, that's not really a goal of pure phenomenological research. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't be done successfully, and then the caveat that I always offer here is if in your own research or in guiding a student in their research, you want to do something that's a little different from the norm, it's extremely important that you find support for what you're going to do in the scholarly literature. Find some people who are recognized as thought leaders and experts and follow their directions, their experiences. Because research designs, just like everything else, they do grow. People do try different things, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. So as you find other scholarly literature that supports what you're trying to do, then I think there's some reason to at least consider that and not just throw everything out, as not a possibility. So once we've looked at the sample size, if the sample that's being considered by any researcher, it doesn't meet this criteria, then, as I said, go read other phenomenology experts who've used larger number of participants to determine if their reasoning fits your study. You can't just say, well, I can do this because somebody else did. It has to fit your situation, and you have to be able to back it up and support it in the scholarly literature. I read a really interesting study last week. A large group of researchers in Australia did a phenomenological study where they interviewed like 85 people, but they had multiple interviewers who were doing the data collection, and they did it kind of like we've talked about. They did multiple interviews, and they went back and with the probing questions, and they gathered all the information, but they were able to do that over a long period of time with a number of researchers. And for most of us, that's not really realistic for what we're trying to accomplish. But once you've decided that the data collection method aligns with the PRM design, then the next consideration might be, does the data analysis align with the PRM? But I think I'm missing some slides. I want to go back to that for just a moment. Sorry.
We see him now.
Okay, so as we're thinking about the data collection method, once we have the sample size, in the data collection where we want to interview each person more than one time, some ways to do that are to schedule multiple interviews with each participant and be sure that we're asking probing questions. Typically, the PRM researcher uses only a few initiating questions, with each one followed by probing questions that are based on the participant's response. And that's one of the ways in qualitative research that we let the participants' responses kind of guide the interview process. An example of this might be, because I have some personal interest in knowing more about Parkinson's disease, I've actually begun some work since I first put this presentation together. I've done some work with a local Parkinson's group where we're going to conduct a phenomenological study of the lived experiences of members of that group. And so some initial questions that we will ask in the interviews would be just really open-ended questions. It's important that we give the person a chance to, think and share and give us whatever information that they're willing to give us. So we start with like one or two initial questions, and we might have three or four, but I'm just using two for this example. If we ask the person, what is it like living with Parkinson's disease, because I have some knowledge of this subject, I know the person might respond with something like, well, it's different every day. And if as an interviewer, if we say, oh, well, that's interesting, and they don't offer anything else, and you move on to the next question or the next person, then you just really have this high-level answer that, people who have Parkinson's disease say it's the disease is for something different every day. It's not consistent. But if you go back with, in the interview, if you follow up with probing questions, for each response they give, if, excuse me, if you ask a probing question like, well, can you tell me more about that? Or what is an example of how that happens? Then they can share more information with you. One person might say, well, some days the meds wear off sooner than others, and you could stop there, but you still don't really have a true understanding of what they're talking about. So you might say, well, what happens, what's an example of what happens when the meds wear off? And those are kind of non-directive questions. You can keep asking non-directive questions that are a lot like your initial questions. Or you can actually ask a more directive question, like, well, you mentioned that the meds might wear off in 2 or 3 hours on one day. How do you feel when that happens? So you kind of directed them back to something they've said initially and followed up with a more probing response. And you want to do that even in the initial interview to begin to get, some really good information that you can use. But it's also very helpful to schedule like a second interview, maybe later on a third or even more, depending on how much more the person has to share. And one of the advantages to that is when you take what you have gathered in that first interview back and you listen to the interview again, or you transcribe it and study it, or you go through your notes, there's a chance for you to reflect on, oh, well, I wonder what that person would have answered if I asked the question a little bit differently, or, oh, here's another question I wish I had asked about that. So the second interview gives you a chance to do that, and also gives the interviewee the opportunity to reflect on what they've said, and they might think, oh, I wish I had mentioned this, or, oh, I said that, but I don't think that was really the question being asked. Maybe I should have said something else. So when you go back for the next interview or the next interview, you've had this time for reflection in between. So you have a great opportunity to really get deeper into the experience that you're trying to understand. And as I said, those probing questions can be both directive or non-directive. And this link that I have here on this slide, when you get this presentation, when it's posted on the Hub or on YouTube, this link is to, let's see if it's actually live for us here. Does that work, Armando? Will it let us go to another?
No,
tab?
try control click for the link.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Oh, it's going to make me stop sharing the other and come back to it. So I won't do that. I'll just stay with what we have.
But you can cut and paste into the chat room so people can get the link and go by themselves. That's another option.
Sure. Okay. So anyway, this link is to it's Coursera. This is a great site because it has a lot of free videos that are available from, I believe it's the University of Amsterdam. And this is a great research site where this link takes us. It deals with qualitative research. And there's a series of free videos there. I won't try to show those tonight, but the link will be out here for you, and I will put it in the chat room before we sign off. That talks about how to do those probing questions and how to use prompts to keep people thinking. A prompt can be something as simple as not saying anything because people don't like silence. So, that's probably the simplest prompt. Because people would start talking and you might get other information. But there's also, a lot of pretty specific prompts and probes that you can use to increase the amount of data that you're able to get from the participant. So finally, in the let's see, I want to go back to the decision-based model.
We don't see it yet.
Yeah, there we go. So this is where we said a while ago, once we have decided the data collection method is appropriate, then the next question then is does the data analysis align with the PRM design? And again, the choices are yes and no. And yes, we're just going to look at this really quickly. I didn't realize how late it was. The data analysis, we're usually looking for the process to be iterative, just like the interviews are iterative. You can start analyzing data based on your first interview, and it will help you get ideas for additional questions to ask or different ways to ask questions. And it's typically done using a modified Van Cam process or other processes that are known specifically for PRM. So I want to jump out of this now if I can. So at the end, we can ask, did I use the PRM research design correctly in my research study, or am I using it correctly in my proposal? So these are just, again, this is just a series of questions that you can use to help you evaluate a plan or a proposal for a study. I think it would also be a great classroom exercise to use if you wanted to, if you were teaching or learning early stages of research design. You could locate articles or dissertations that are already published, and you could apply the same evaluation technique to those to help you see how these various components look within published studies. So some final thoughts. Did we get there, Armando? Some differences between PRM and other qualitative designs?
I'm still seeing the DBL.
Shouldn't be. It shows this one's sharing. It's not there yet, huh? Now is it there?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff to throw out there among this little technical thing that we're dealing with too. But just kind of a bit of a wrap up or a little more discussion. Some differences between PRM and other qualitative research designs. One thing that we often tell students and know in our own studies is multiple sources of data are used in case studies. So, but in PRM, the multiple interviews of the same participants are used. So we use a smaller number of participants, and it's okay to only use interviews. You get the rigor by the number of multiple interviews of the same participants. Another sources of data and qualitative designs can be interviews, focus groups, documentation, direct observations, participant observation, and physical artifacts. Those are typically found in all kinds of qualitative or other kinds of qualitative research, but face-to-face interviews are in my opinion at least, and in the opinion of others that I work with, is that the interviews with a person who experienced the phenomenon is the primary data collection method. Now we do read about other studies that have been done. We do know that there are some other experts who are more willing to look at other types of data. Diaries and personal texts are sometimes used, particularly in hermeneutical phenomenology, but in my mind, that restricts the researcher's ability to follow up with any kind of probing questions. So I suppose you could use it in conjunction with the interviewing, but if the interviewing is done correctly with the probing and prompting and follow-up interviews, it's likely not necessary to have the other sources of data like you would expect in another design like the case study. And I mentioned earlier that a goal of some qualitative designs is saturation. That's not necessarily true in PRM. We're looking again at this deep, rich data from a small group of participants. And those participants describe their own experiences, and in doing so, they increase their awareness of their feelings about the lived experience, and they're able to continue to give you more information as they increase their own awareness of the situation. In a narrative inquiry study, it's more about gathering participant stories about their experiences, where in the PRM, it's more about how the experience has shaped their views or the meaning they've assigned to the phenomenon they've experienced. Narrative inquiry is very close to PRM, and sometimes is a better choice, particularly for our students in our CDS programs, if that aligns with their practitioner's degree. We know that Delphi study seeks participants who are experts on the phenomenon of interest, but PRM only requires that the participants have the lived experience. We're not necessarily going out and looking at people who were experts because of anything that had to do with the experience. It's just really anyone who had the lived experience that you're trying to study. In case studies, we work with a bounded system and collect at least 3 types of artifacts or sets of data, and PRM works with just a specific experience. Hermeneutics is, almost another area of its own, although we do have hermeneutical phenomenology. I've read some work that says hermeneutics might not even be phenomenology. Maybe it is looking at a larger set of participants and then looking at textual analysis of the transcripts to come up with underlying meaning and expressing that as themes. And it also can be purely text-based, so that's a little different from the typical phenomenology studies, even the hermeneutical, but there is a type of study just called hermeneutics that your students or you might have run across. So here's a list of the resources that we've used, and this will all be, again, published for you. I'm going to stop and ask if there are any questions at this time. Hopefully there's some that we can answer for you. Do we stir up any questions? Anything that's not clear?
Let us try to,
differently?
Yeah, let's try to, each one that has a question, to unmute her or his phone and see if that works. If it doesn't, then you can always put your question in the chat. But the preferred option is that you unmute your phone and ask the question to her. Anybody? I see some chatting going on that maybe is food for thought between Ryan and Laura Ann. I don't know, Ryan, you may want to touch on that. There seems to be an interesting topic. You want to get into the conversation, please?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you well.
Yep. What we're talking about, Karen, is just on that one of the last slides you mentioned about hermeneutics and how it might be different from phenomenology. And Laura Ann and I were stating that hermeneutics itself as an independent research method actually arose out of biblical exegesis or biblical analysis, and
Right.
that's why that textual based analysis is important for hermeneutics.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and so then hermeneutical phenomenology seemed to arise later. I believe biblical hermeneutics came earlier, but I don't know if you know time-wise on that. I'm a little fuzzy there.
Yeah, me too. Not off the top of my head, I don't.
Yeah, but there is that overlap, that Venn diagram
Right.
overlap of hermeneutical phenomenology, which is still interpretative, just like the biblical analysis is interpretative. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you. Great presentation, Karen.
Thanks, Ryan.
Anybody else?
Karen, this is Mansura. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you for the presentation. I really enjoy the way that you incorporated DBL into your presentation. And also, I was wondering if you can briefly explain or what is the situation basically that, like, as a chair, dissertation chair, we should kind of recommend our students not to use phenomenology. I mean, you mentioned examples, but I just wanted to hear further recommendations. The particular topics that actually they are absolutely not appropriate for phenomenology.
Right. I really was sharing the information that's published in the College of Doctoral Studies dissertation guide, the 2019 dissertation guide, and it says specifically that phenomenology in general is probably not an appropriate. I'm not even sure it says probably. I think it says it's not an appropriate research design for many of our students' practitioner degree programs. That often what the student is trying to study, for example, like in a business degree, that would be one practitioner degree. They may be looking at a process within an organization, so a process wouldn't be something that you would study with phenomenology. You would study it likely with a case study. Some examples that are included in that dissertation guide that say might be appropriate for PRM are like healthcare or nursing situations. I think that'd be something similar to like the example that I had here tonight that was from some of Ryan's previous work about the nurses who are caring for patients who are dying and how are they dealing with their own emotions. It's only really appropriate in any study if you're looking at the lived experience of the participant, and then you have to figure out, I guess, how that lived experience aligns with the degree. Does that make sense? So, for example, if a student was seeking a degree seeking a degree in EDD, educational technology, they're likely going to look at topics that do with technology, not necessarily with somebody's lived experiences with using technology. Maybe that's a better example.
Right. Yes, I think this is clear that we particularly focus on, if we particularly focus on the process, then we wouldn't use phenomenology. But if we are interested in experience of people, then we focus on using phenomenology, right? Very good.
Hi, Karen, this is Cheryl. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. I did want to also note that in the dissertation guide, as you had mentioned, they're very clear that the only two programs in which phenomenology will be allowed is DHA and DHM. Those are the only ones in which a proposal could get through QRM on that process. So it's really they're very much discouraging all other students from even thinking about phenomenology. And in Res 724, many students are very much interested in phenomenology, because even in tech, you could look at what are the students' experiences? How did they feel when they're using VR or AR? But they're not allowed to do that. So I think that is the direction, or that's the guidance that we're getting. And so we have to direct our students to look at another type of qualitative research design that will still allow them to study their area of interest, and just be a little more creative as far as how they get their data.
Right, I agree with that. I agree, and yet I still see, well, there are still some phenomenological studies being approved, but I'm guessing that's because the students so far along in the process. Going forward, I think what you said is correct. But I also still believe what I said earlier, that I don't think that takes away from the value of the research design for all of us as researchers, for research that we're doing beyond the dissertation.
But I was wondering, I had the dissertation guide open. You said there are limitations on the type, or there are just suggestions that to avoid certain type, but they're gonna let it use. Where is that says that there are some only two type of?
Well, I believe it's on page 40.
Okay.
I think Mimi just typed page 40. So if you look on page 40, it's very clear, and Dr. Sean Boone made it very clear in our last, not the last meeting that we had, but the previous meeting earlier this year, when the new dissertation guide was going to be rolled out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a reason behind that, that I want to just share with everyone. Perhaps many of you guys know that often students have difficulty applying phenomenology in a very correct way. And because of that, the decision was just like recommending students not to use it at all. Just because students, and you know that we got a lot of phenomenological design in our dissertation, students couldn't, most of them, understand where exactly they need to use phenomenology and how. Like, I heard so many studies that they just use a couple of interviews here and there, to a very limited extent, and consider that phenomenology, and they focused on the process, not lived experience of participants. So I guess because of all of this, the decision was just like recommending for students not to use phenomenology. But as Karen mentioned, phenomenology is a valid design, regardless. I mean, our students, for now, it's recommended not to use for those particular area, but still phenomenology is a design that faculty members can use, alumni, or any other researcher. So I think this is just like a recommendation to really take care of all those misinterpretations about phenomenology design.
Right, I agree with that. I remember a few years ago, it seemed like 2 out of every 3 dissertations said they were, a phenomenological research study, and if you really study the design used in them, they weren't. They truly weren't. So I think this might just be the pendulum swinging the other way, as often happens,
Right, exactly. And if you remember, Karen, that was one of my reasons that I thought we need to talk about phenomenology to clarify.
Right.
To clarify
Right.
what is phenomenology exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And Ryan's been a big help in helping us to pull all those resources together and grow our own understanding. I would be remiss if I didn't recognize Dr. Rominger for his assistance and his expertise, which I appreciate greatly.
Well, thank you, Karen. I enjoyed working with you last year, and it's nice to see you giving the presentation rather than being up there. I think you did a great job, by the way. That's good.
Thanks. All right, and I don't seem to have my last slide, which is the next webinar is Armando. It's yours, right? July the 18th.
Yes, the July the 18th. Yes, that's on correlational design.
Yes. So more great things to come. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Karen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. And also, please check our website. If you go to research.phoenix.edu, under research community, you would find research methodology group, and you would find materials related to all these webinars there in that group.
And this presentation will be uploaded into YouTube. So the recording for this one and the previous one will be there soon, no later than this weekend.
Great.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.